So one thing I'm really interested to hear your take on is what made you decide and research that sleep belongs in the same conversation as exercise and health in the way of performance?
So that comes from, um, I mean, aside from the fact that I always found sleep fascinating and interesting and important, and but putting it in that context, really solidified for me in two different ways. First, when I was a PhD student, and the track I was in was the behavioral medicine track, where we were learning about these different domains of health and how these different domains of health were related to outcomes and how behavior played important roles in those. And I guess that whole time I was just thinking, just felt like sleep belonged in those conversations. And it felt like they were missing, but that field of sleep health didn't really exist at the time. Um, the other thing is what really pushed it forward was um, as I was a grad student, the person who led the lab, Dan Kripke, he was lead author on a very large study that had come out in 2002 when I was a first or second year grad student at the time. And it was a study of over 1 million people tracked over about 10 years with a whole lot of different covariates in the model, showing more definitively than ever before, and kind of since, except for the meta analyses, that how much sleep experience in the real world was related to longevity. And people were dying sooner if they weren't getting the healthy recommended amounts of sleep. And that led me to the question of, but why? Why is that the case? You know, what is it that's linking this self-report of sleep? Because some of it might be the sleep itself, some of it might be how people are experiencing it, all these things. What was that connection that was linking sleep experiences with longevity? And the belief was that I had at the time, that was shaped by everything I was reading, was there isn't one path. There's many paths. We just don't know what they are or how they're all connected with each other. So that was sort of where I went. So when I started as a postdoc, and I was developing a project meeting with my postdoc mentor, Alan Pack, and he asked me a question that really kind of changed the trajectory of my career. And we're trying to decide what to do as a postdoc project. And he said, "What do you think? Forget what study you think we can afford to do on a postdoc budget and your time, and forget all of that. What is the most important and compelling question that you have about the field right now?" And so I said, "Why is sleep linked with longevity? Why? And is there anything we can do about that?" He's like, "Great, great question. Answer that." And I said, "All at once?" He's like, "No, you're not going to be able to do that all at once, but focus on that question. That's your question. Go after that. Let's design a study that can help answer that question." And that's sort of where I went from there. And so then I'm realizing that there were a lot of links in that chain that just didn't exist yet. So there was a cohort of us that all sort of came up around the same time, that all came from this perspective that sleep health was a part of health, which I can't emphasize how foreign of an idea that was for people. Where the sleep disorders community uh, didn't really understand it as a sleep disorder. The behavioral health community didn't. It's not diet and exercise. Like, it didn't fit anywhere. But there were a group of us, especially, so there's like Lauren Hale, Sanjay Patel, Niro Patel, Orfeo Buxton, Diane Lauderdale, Kristen Knudsen. Like, there was this group of us, and a number of other people who I haven't mentioned, just where we all sort of supported each other and in this idea. And so we published as much as we could in terms of filling in those gaps. And wherever we looked, there was something there. And almost everywhere we looked, there was something there. And it helped flesh out that story. And it really helped shape, where things were going. And another big part of it was the understanding that if we're going to be linking this to health, we have to connect with people. And it doesn't make any sense to do this in an academic vacuum. And that's also why, from the beginning, it was a deliberate strategy of mine to get out there, get this stuff out there, talk to, you know, I remember at that time I was talking to everyone from the New York Times to us to people writing for their student newspaper in high school, like high school student reporters and the Washington Post sort of got equal billing on my calendar where I would talk to anybody who's interested in this. And the idea was got to get people talking and thinking about this and give people the framework for thinking about it, and they'll run with it. Tell people how to wrap their head around this experience that's universal and how to think about it the way you're thinking about it, and it will empower people to make healthy decisions and choices, and it'll resonate. And then it becomes a bottom up instead of just lobbying for funding. This will get people talking about it and make it something that our biggest battle was fighting against an academic establishment that didn't know what box to put us in. And instead, we sort of like, well, let's just make our own box and make that inevitable. And so all of that came together. So that's sort of how this got built.
Well, it's funny now because my first foray into sleep research was when I was in grad school. Like I just got out 2 years ago, so it was pretty recent. But there was a lab who was looking into sleep research, and they were going down the path of what hormones could modulate sleep. Was it like sleep onset, sleep efficiency, and then what happens like post hoc if you're
Yeah.
not getting enough quality sleep. So I just took part in all the studies because I got $50 every time I did a sleep study. And then I read Matthew Walker's book and I spoke with
Yep.
Dr. Allison Brager. And now
Yep.
speaking with you, I'm like, what are these like little connections that we don't know about? Because everyone now is doing like aura rings and sleep trackers, and they might not know the science behind it, but at least they're in that goal to get higher amounts of better quality sleep.
Yeah, I mean, that's been an amazing thing to see where, when I was a grad student, more than 20, about, 20-ish years ago, we were using wearables in the lab. These were scientific devices that we were using. They didn't exist commercially. No one thought they ever would exist commercially. There were these things, and every time we were using them in research, we'd need to write whole paragraphs justifying these things. Like, no, it's not brainwave activity, but sleep is not a wrist-based state. But it is relevant. It is measuring what you think it's measuring. And now it's amazing to see what's happened in society where people have embraced this idea of objective sleep tracking. Though there's still a lot of misunderstandings about it, and we can talk about some of those if you want. But it's just been really great to see that people have embraced this idea of sleep quantification as something that's useful and helpful.
A lot that has been seemingly going around the internet, like a lot of the podcasts I've listened to from some of the scientists like yourself, they talk about the sleep cycle with
Yeah.
what is it like the three NREMs, like N1, N2, N3, followed by REM, and how that
Yeah.
differs by every single person. So it's like not to
Oh
say
yeah.
yours is 60 minutes or 90 minutes, it's always changing.
Oh yeah, it's not even by person. It's also across the night. It's just the 90 minutes. That's like saying the average person breathes, about so many times per minute. But that doesn't mean everyone. Not only that everyone does that, or that that's even the right thing to do all the time, or even that you would expect that rate of breath to be constant across the day and across activities. And like it's just a framework. And So yeah, so the sleep stages. So the thing about sleep stages is, and so I've got a bit of a hot take about sleep stages, and that it's that sleep stages are paradoxically extremely important, and mostly useless, from a health perspective. In that, um, so sleep. Part of this is understanding what sleep stages really are. Sleep stages, they're things we made up. Somebody in the 1930s, in the 1940s, they put electrodes on people's heads, and they recorded brainwave activity, and then at some point someone fell asleep, right? And then they saw, ooh, that's different. That brainwave activity is different, and so um, and so what they found was that if you just looked at this across a period of time, you would notice that there are distinct, different patterns of that brainwave activity. Where, so, like, if you look at brainwave activity when someone's awake, and generally what it looks like to explain to people, imagine a sound wave. Like, everyone can imagine what a sound wave looks like. Now imagine sort of low murmuring sound wave, where it's like, shh, like where what you'd have is lots of little tiny peaks. So low, not high amplitude, low amplitude, fast frequency. It would look sort of like this. That's what waking activity looks like. It's very sort of like this, and then um, sorry about that. Um, so waking activity, you have fast frequency, low amplitude, and then what you have in sleep is you have an increasing amount of slower frequency, higher amplitude activity. Where in stage one, still looks a lot like waking activity. You get some of the slower activity, where the brain is obviously doing different things. Sleep is fundamentally different from awake, but it doesn't have a lot of the bigger waves. Stage two is sort of, I like to call stage two, sometimes people call it light sleep. Stage one is light sleep. It's not really restful. If you were waking up from it, you won't really know. Um, but you're like, oh, when you sort of nod off and someone says, wake up. And you're like, I was fine. Like, that was probably stage one. That's where you get the hypnic jerks. That's stage one sleep. Now, stage two sleep is often lumped in with it and called light sleep, but I don't like calling it light sleep. I like calling it regular sleep, or normal sleep, or vanilla sleep, or whatever you want to call it, because this will take up more than 50% of your night, or at least it should. This is what the majority of your sleep is. This is regular, normal sleep. Most of the work of sleep is being done in stage two. The brainwave activity there is you get more of the slower frequency, and you get certain very specific waveforms. One is called sleep spindles, where like it's called a spindle. It's like, when you wrap thread around a thing, it kind of looks like that, where they're sort of going along, and then it goes shh, and then it kind of stops. It looks kind of like a spindle of thread, and it has to do with different kinds of brain signaling. And then you also have what are called K complexes, which are like sort of one big spiky wave that sort of comes out of nowhere. Usually those have to do with suppressing external information about keeping and protecting your sleep. But stage two doesn't always have, not every period of stage two has those. They're just characteristic. There's a lot of the work of sleep is being done there. Then you have what's called stage three, where it's just one level deeper. And sometimes this is what's called deep sleep or slow wave sleep, because the brainwave activity, you see these bigger, slower waves, higher amplitude, slower frequency. And this is where a lot of the healing and recovery stuff happens. This is when you secrete growth hormone. This is when a lot of muscle repair is happening. Your muscles are very relaxed. Your breathing is slower. Things like that. Those are the three non-REM stages. Now, separate from those, there's REM sleep. So REM sleep is a very weird sleep stage where, before it was discovered as its own thing, it was thought of as just stage one, because it happens sort of in the cycle of where stage one would be. The brainwave activity look very similar to stage one, which is very similar to waking. Um, but the waves are a little bit different in REM. You can tell the difference. And what's different about them is the brain is active in a very different way in REM sleep versus stage one. Where in REM sleep, this is where dreams and nightmares happen. It gets its name because your eyes have these jerky movements. Um, though there's a few other really, really interesting things that happen in REM sleep. One, for example, is even though your muscles are very relaxed in stage three, this low wave deep sleep, um, in REM sleep, you're actually actively paralyzed. So your muscles are even more relaxed, but they're not relaxed because they're not getting instructions. They're relaxed because you are actively slammed on the brakes. You couldn't move if you wanted to. That's why sometimes you get a twitch, but that's all that breaks through. That's why sleepwalking doesn't occur during REM sleep. It's not acting out dreams. Sleepwalking happens during stage three when you're not thinking. There's no thinking going on. There's no memory formation happening. It's just you're engaging in some automatic behaviors and you're running some code that was supposed to get suppressed. Um, but the operator is asleep and not paying attention, and so you end up running some code that you weren't supposed to. Um, so REM sleep. So it's very important. This is where dreams and nightmares happen, and we can get really into like what are dreams and why do we have them. But there's a lot of stuff that's happening. So the peak blood flow in the brain is during REM sleep, not waking. Your brain is very active during REM sleep. There's a lot of really important stuff that's happening. One way to think about it is that in the deeper sleep, you remember I was talking about you have these big, slower waves. So I should tell you a little bit about what brain waves are. What is a brain wave? Really, what it is for people listening, it's you put an electrode on your scalp and you're listening for voltage changes. You're listening through many layers of stuff, but you can get voltage changes. So first of all, it's voltage changes that are happening just on the very outside of the brain. You're not measuring anything deep. You're measuring just the very surface level, first of all. And that's not where sleep is. Sleep doesn't exist on the surface of the brain. I mean, it exists there, but it's not driven by or controlled by the surface of the brain in any way. It's controlled much deeper. We don't measure that. So we're not measuring sleep directly with brain waves. We're measuring an echo of an echo of an echo of what sleep is. And that's important to know because it's also not perfect, but it is something. It's close. It's closest we've sort of have. But what is it measuring? So imagine a sound wave. Remember, I was talking about this like a sound wave. You have like waking, and then you have sleep, which is more like this, and then you have the deep sleep, which is more like this. And the way I explain this to students is what you're measuring is you're not measuring one neuron firing. You're measuring electrical noise coming from millions of cells sort of all at once, a whole audience you're listening to all at once. You're listening to an entire cocktail party on the other end of that wall. Now imagine a sound wave. And so the way I teach this in an auditorium is I have all the students, I say, okay, everyone golf clap. So they sort of, and then I say, listen to the sound wave. Fast frequency, low, fast frequency, low amplitude. Then I say, same pressure, it's about the same speed, just match my pace. And then you hear clap, 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 clap. So now you have higher amplitude, lower frequency. Same number of hands clapping at about the same rate, as a very similar rate to it was before. It's just they're more synchronized. And what it seems like is happening when you see slower brain waves, it's not that your brain is slowing, it's that the activity is becoming highly synchronized as opposed to very diffuse. So instead of everyone having their own separate side conversations and doing their thing, everyone in the cocktail party is reciting the same things at the same time, and so it sounds a little more organized now. And it seems like part of what's happening is that during stage three, part of what's happening is all those experiences you took in during the day that your brain has that it's holding, and all the different responses that it gave, you're filtering through those. and thinking, which of these experiences, which of these reactions are things that were important and are things that are not important? What do I keep? And like, what's all the junk that it's like sorting through your mail? Junk, 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 ads, whatever. And then, this envelope I actually have to open. Maybe there's nothing in there that's useful, but it looks important. So I'm going to keep that one aside. So so that first stage is that sort. And then you have in REM sleep, you took that mail that you sorted, you took those envelopes that at least looked important, and then you go through those, you read them, and you think, all right, what is this? Do I have to file this? Is this a bill I need to pay? You know, and so you go through that information, you sort it, you organize it, you integrate it into the whole so that you start the new day um, in your brain has upgraded itself overnight, and now it's creating its new version for tomorrow, where that stage 3 sleep sorted and REM sleep organized what was left. And that's why if you look at sleep stages across sleep cycling across the night, you start out light, then go down into the deep, and then come back up, and then go down, and then come back up. And then the coming back up usually is where the REM happens. Um, but the deeper the stage 3 periods are aggregated to the beginning of the night. The first one is usually the longest. The second one is usually second longest. If you even get a third um, cycle, you should get a third cycle, but it may not even touch stage 3 anymore. You may be done at that point. And so the stage 3 diminishes. And then you have REM sleep starts very brief, and then that should expand. And if you think about what some of those functions are, that actually makes sense. You need to sort stuff first before you organize it. So there's lots of ways that your body prioritizes getting more of that slow wave sleep in the beginning. That's why if you're getting 4 or 5 hours, you're probably getting at least most of or nearly all of the stage 3 sleep you ever were going to get anyway. So people who cut their sleep a little short, often they don't reduce their amount of slow wave sleep at all. It's mostly REM sleep in stage 2 that they're losing. Because stage 2 being what's there in the background of most of it. It's not the filtering out that you're losing, it's the organization and the processing that you're losing. So REM sleep is very important. So what I mean by sleep stages being very important, this is why they seem to be representing important functions that are going on. But then when I say they're mostly clinically useless, what I mean is worrying about your body's sleep stages is like worrying about whether your lungs are transferring oxygen and carbon dioxide correctly. Your body's doing its thing, and like, well, I'm worried if I'm not leveraging oxygen transport optimally. It's like, okay, well, first of all, what are you going to do about that? Like, but second of all, do you have any reason to suspect that you're not? That your body isn't doing its thing, like as it wants to? It's like, do you have a lung disease? No. Do you have an airway issue? No. Does your oxygen look like it's off and abnormal in any important way? No. Don't worry about it. Let your body do its thing. You give it, don't live in a hypoxic place. Breathe clean air. Like, don't get lung disease. On your list of things in your life you should be worrying about, that like how your lungs are converting are exhaling carbon dioxide, inhaling oxygen. Until you have some sort of respiratory condition, like, don't worry about it. Let your body do its thing. It knows what it's doing. Just get out of your way. Get out of your own way. And sleep stages are a lot like that. They're not really under your control much anyway. They're your body doing its thing. If you want to get more deep sleep, no, you don't. Like, just get out of your way. Is there anything preventing you from getting the deep sleep your body wants? If the answer is yes, move that thing. If the answer is no, then don't worry about it. The main way people can control their sleep stages is just getting enough. Because of people who are sleeping 6 hours versus 8, the big difference is you're getting less REM. And REM is very important. So people talk about dream deprivation versus sleep deprivation might be part of what's happening. Like, we're losing out on our dreams. And that's what dreams seem to be. Dreams seem to be our experience of the brain speaking to itself in its native language of thoughts and ideas and information that it's sorting and organizing. And you're witnessing the sorting, organizing, and processing of that information as a dream. Um, but and why do we do it? Because it enhances survival. It helps us read between the lines of our experience and integrate this stuff into the larger whole. It's the difference between a thing you remember and a thing that makes you part of who you are, that you don't even know that you remember. That it gets integrated. And so, um, yeah, if you want to impact sleep stages, maybe sleep a little more. But we don't really understand these things well enough yet. So, for example, if you take an antidepressant or THC, both of those classes of drugs, massive REM suppressors. You can block 50 to almost 100% of your REM sleep just by taking one of these medications with no apparent bad effects on what REM sleep is supposed to be doing. If anything, if REM sleep is important for emotion regulation, why is suppressing REM sleep, which is really important in emotion regulation, why is that a good thing? Or is it a good thing? Who knows? People started exploring this back in like the 70s and 80s and 90s when this stuff first came out. And there was a whole bunch of dead ends in the research of like, doesn't seem to make sense. Clearly, there's stuff we don't understand about this yet. We got to wait for the technology to catch up. So I guess that's also what I'm saying is that looking at your numbers, like let's say you even had a good measurement of your sleep stages data. How would you even know how to make sense of it? What if you're taking something that's suppressing something, or maybe it's suppressing the ability to detect it, but it's actually the stuff going on under the hood is working just fine. It's just we're only looking at that brainwave synchronization data, the echo of the echo of the echo of that actual process. Maybe the process is working just fine. You just don't know it. Who knows? And so I guess that's what I'm saying is that scientifically they're very interesting, but on an individual basis, on a night to night basis, it's hard to know what to make of some of that information, how much to read into anything. I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I guess like my one of my follow-ups to that is, does the body modulate how much of each sleep stage that it needs? So
Yeah.
like an example of that is like I know babies when they're nursing, when they're infants, the composition of the breast milk changes based on the saliva that's like going to the mother. So it's like the amount of leucine, the amount of casein will change in the mother's milk. Does that
Yeah.
happen throughout the night, throughout the week, throughout the life cycle?
I would say, from a breast milk perspective, there's some data on this. There's not a lot, and I know people who are working on this right now. But in terms of how your body changes sleep stages, yeah. I mean, like you sleep deprive somebody, not only are they going to fall asleep faster, they're going to drop into stage three faster, and they'll stay in it longer to overcompensate, even if given the same amount of sleep time. So you have, yeah, your body will try and compensate. Like it's sort of like, if you're nutritionally deficient in something, you'll start craving whatever that is, kind of. And the body does that with your sleep stages, where like if you selectively REM deprive somebody. So this is also why when people take REM suppressing medications, for example. Like, so when people are using cannabis, whatever, to relax at night and it's suppressing their REM sleep, when they stop taking it, what they often report is intense dreams and nightmares. Well, that was your REM rebounding because your brain's like, oh, finally, you're out of my way. Let me make up for some lost time here. And you get into REM sleep harder and more intensely, which then becomes more intense and disturbing dreams sometimes. And so then they say, well, I need to smoke to keep the nightmares away. But actually, the nightmares were just a symptom of, they were just something your brain had to go through for a little bit of time before it worked itself out of its system. So yeah, there's all kinds of internal controls that help regulate sleep stages. And also I got to say, the sleep stages coming off of wearables. Now that you know what sleep stages are, you must be asking the question, what the heck does that have to do with my finger or my wrist? And I would say very little, except that you can make a relatively reasonable guess at which of those sleep stages you're in based solely on the combination of movement and heart rate. However, you'll notice that you cannot differentiate stage one and two, so they just call it light. But they're very different from each other. Stage one is actually light, shallow, and not restful. Stage two is normal. So you can't those data points won't differentiate them, so they usually lump them together. And then they have stage three sleep, which they usually call deep, and then there's REM. And you can tell that pretty well, but you're still dealing with between 60 and 80% accuracy. It's ballpark. The fact that you can guess at what the outer level of the brain is doing based on what the wrist is doing is nothing short of a miracle and magic. But it's not perfect and far from perfect. It's a rough ballpark. So if don't worry about things like how many minutes it says or what percent it is. It's just if there's anything in there, it should look. If you look at the tracing, it should look roughly normal, like in the same general. You should see more deep sleep in the beginning of the night, more REM sleep at the end of the night. You should see awakenings happening at those stage transitions. That's when they're likely to happen. The typical adult will wake up 10 to 20 times a night or more. So you should see lots of these little awakenings during the night. Totally normal. You might be able to see 1 to 3 full awakenings during the night that last more than a few minutes, whether or not you remember them. Totally normal. Like things should look the way they're supposed to look. So that the accuracy is okay for sort of just a rough visual inspection, but don't dive into the numbers too much yet. Um, because it's like two games of telephone went in opposite directions. One went here, one went here, and you're using the result of this game of telephone to guess what this game of telephone came up with. The fact that you're in the same ballpark is not super surprising, but the fact that it's not perfect should not be surprising also.
We did a lot of work with blood pressure dipping because we had
Oh
those
yeah,
24-hour blood pressure cuffs. Like
yep,
those were the
yeah. I use those all the time.
bane of my existence. I hate those things. But I feel
And
like that
getting people
was,
again, they'll disturb your sleep too because especially when they squeeze.
yeah. And like, I would always kind of question that because it was like in the room when we did a lot of our sleep studies, we had like the actigraph on our wrists, we had the 24-hour cuff on our arm, we had
Yep.
something in like the window to like detect like sounds and movements. And then we had like a log to basically say like when we went to sleep, when we think we went to sleep, when we think we woke up, if we snooze, like sleep onset, all different stuff. And I was like, the blood pressure dipping thing has some data that like I would really look into as far as like are you dipping enough to get into
Right.
sleep enough, and especially as a grad student too, you're probably sleep deprived unless you have like too much caffeine or something to keep you up. But like the whole heart rate thing with like on like a radial pulse, I like to
Yeah.
look at those things, and I'm not going to pay $30 a month or something to tell me what my sleep score is.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so clinically, I find the heart rate data useful in that like I'm not looking at the numbers, but what I look at is the pattern. So if someone says I slept for 7 8 hours or whatever, but I still feel crummy, like I feel like I'm not sleeping. What's going on? Like, let me take a look at this heart rate data. And you look for the, I look for the dipping. Did you not dip? Did your heart rate not dip during the night? Or did it dip, but then did it rise? You know, people who say like, oh, I sleep for the first half of the night, great, but then the second half of the night I'm up. It's like, well, what was happening to your heart rate around that time? Why did it keep going up? Or you look for the little spikes that occur during the awakenings. And so you see like, oh, seeing lots of these all night. Why is this so variable? You have like undiagnosed sleep apnea or something? What's going on that's causing these arousals across the night? Why is your heart rate not dropping? Or maybe the inflection point, right after the inflection point, you keep reporting all this super shallow sleep. Why is it rising here? Is it rising too early? Are you trying to, what's going on in the environment? Is it too hot? So I find it useful to look at just sort of as a peek under the sympathetic hood to see like is there even if the sleep data look totally normal, is there something going on that your body's is there some noise in your body somewhere? And sometimes the heart rate data, if you've got wearable data, you can get a pretty good window into there is something. It doesn't tell you what's happening, but it can tell you something's going on. But yeah, the blood pressure, I'm really excited about the new cuffless blood pressure devices. um, I still haven't dug into the technology of how exactly they work, but the idea is estimating blood pressure pretty accurately without the squeeze. Um, and yeah, I mean, like it's part of it is it's hard to measure blood pressure dipping when you keep interfering with someone's sleep. So it'll be interesting to see what happens.
What have you done any work with polyphasic sleeping?
Um, well, there's lots of definitions of polyphasic sleeping. So, do you mean people who break their sleep into a couple of chunks, or do you talking about people who are sleeping sort of around the day?
Well, I guess I know that I don't know if it was 100 years ago, 200 years ago, whatever. They used to have like
Oh,
sleep
so like
phases too.
biphasic.
Yeah,
Yeah,
biphasic. But
yeah,
then, like my girlfriend is a PA in a hospital, so she just does like these 24-hour shifts. And if she can squeeze in a 20-minute nap or a 2-hour nap, she will. And I
yeah.
wonder about the metabolic implications of that, if that has any long term effects on thyroid function, blood lipid parameters, blood pressure, things like that.
So in terms of the biphasic sleep, where the way I think of it is sort of sleep part one and sleep part two. Um, I see it all the time clinically, especially as people get older. There's just not enough gas in the tank to take them from on the road trip. Like they need a pit stop, and they need to fill back up, stop for lunch, and then get back on the road. And sometimes fighting that becomes counterproductive. Like in Sandwich, we try and like consolidate their sleep, but sometimes that island of wakefulness is inevitable, and so sometimes it's less about trying to squeeze it out and more about figuring out what that natural rhythm is and accept it a little bit and figure out how much of that wakefulness is required by your body to take a break and how much of it is just due to stress of not getting back to sleep. So we take the performance anxiety piece of it out. But I see it clinically all the time, and I don't see any negative implications of it, especially in older people who need sleep part one and sleep part two. I see that a lot. In terms of people who are shift workers, like before getting shift workers, there's people who are sleeping sort of around the clock on purpose. All the evidence suggests that, especially when that's not even really adding up to 7 or 8 hours, yeah, that's going to have pretty negative metabolic impairments. I mean, there's a whole group of people who sort of swear by this. Um, I'm very skeptical. I've not encountered someone who's been able to do it and maintain it and feel good with it and show that it works fine. I mean, it's probably fine in the short term for certain operational situations. Um, Most famously, people who do sailing. Um, it's really a 24-hour job that you're doing. And so, how do you maintain functioning across 24 hours? Well, you just split sleep into little chunks. It's like, it's not really sustainable and it's not good for you, but it's better than nothing. You know, I mean, it's, being in a hypoxic environment and like taking breaths is better than suffocating, but it doesn't mean that it's preferable. Um, and so yeah, I think that this idea of on purpose napping on purpose is actually, it's not what I'm talking about. Napping on purpose is probably good. Like a nap, humans discovered napping before we were humans. Like anyone who has a pet knows, or a dog or a cat knows that mammals don't sleep all in one chunk just at night. Like mammals nap. This is totally normal. And humans have napped, like I said, since before we were even humans. We've always been napping. Most cultures in the world embrace napping, especially in the middle of the day, as not only normal but adaptive and functioning. Till the Industrial Revolution came around and we said, hey, you're working in a factory. I'm not paying you to sleep. And that's a cultural issue, not biological. Biologically, napping is perfectly not only fine and safe, but often preferable in the middle of the day. Um, Napping on purpose improves reaction time, improves performance pretty much across the board. Napping because you cannot stay awake, that's a little different. Napping by choice is one thing. Napping by accident is a different thing. That's a sign. It's sort of like having a snack in the middle of the day. I think of naps as like snacks for sleep. Having a snack in the middle of the day could be a great way to boost energy, stave off hunger, reduce overeating so you're not starving later, all this stuff. But if you're snacking all day and not eating any real meals, that's probably not great. If you find yourself snacking and it's because you're hungry all the time, what's up? with your appetite. Why are you hungry? You shouldn't be hungry all the time. Something's up. And so that's what I mean. Like, it's not the snack that's the problem. It's the why, and it's the when, and it's the how. Same thing with napping. It's not that the nap is a problem. It's that if it's not by choice, I mean, if you're a shift worker and you have to like get some daytime sleep to function, like, I'm not going to stand in the way of you doing that. But doesn't mean it's as good as nighttime sleep, but it's better than nothing. I mean, there's a reason why shift work, there's decades of data now that show that shift work might not be worse than smoking for you, but it might be, in terms of its impact on your health and your metabolism and cancer risk and diabetes risk and all these systems in your body. I mean, this isn't even about sleep. This is about circadian rhythms and how, it looks like, John Hoganish's data was showing that about 50% of the human genome is rhythmic. And then if you take that and you shake that all up by putting the rhythms in weird places, and your body and your liver and your kidneys and your skin and your endothelium and your beta cells and your brain and your hypothalamus and your sympathetic activity and your heart and all the different systems that are running on these clocks trying to stay synchronized with each other are all shaken up. It's not going to be working. You're going to have these, you're going to be resilient to it. It's probably not going to kill you. It's not going to be like, oh my gosh, I shift worked for a week and I die now. Like, no, it's going to be, it's like eating nothing but cheeseburgers and pizza. Like, it's not going to kill you yet, but like, it'll accumulate as a risk factor. Just, it gets in the way of your body trying to do the thing that it wants to do. And it gets in the way. And so it accumulates as a risk factor over time. So I guess my answer to your question is biphasic sleep at night by choice is, I don't think is really a big deal for people who it works for. If you're doing it because you have insomnia, the stress around it actually is where the risk factor is. If you're napping during the day, naps by choice are probably okay as long as you're getting the vast majority of your 24-hour sleep in your biological night, whenever that is. With the caveat that some shift workers totally shift, where their melatonin secretion, their biological night is happening during the day, in which case that might be mostly fine. Um, but if you're sleeping at times when your body doesn't want to be sleeping because it's in a day mode, not a night mode, and you're doing more than just a little bit of napping regularly, it can lead to inefficiencies. I don't know. Is that sort of what you were asking?
Yeah, it's very interesting to hear about this, because I don't know. I feel like with when you were saying that if you are not getting a sufficient amount of sleep for a period of time, it's like your body sucks you like right into N3 and then into REM,
Yeah.
because you're like, yeah,
Right.
like you're getting what you need. And like that's what I always am like interested in hearing about folks who do shift work. And it's like, are you doing a 12-hour day shift, 12-hour night shift, 24-hour shift? And you do this for like 10, 15, 20 years. And I guess
Yeah.
like then to dive a little bit deeper.
Stresses your system out. Your system is always trying to catch up to itself. And I do want to jump in and say this idea that you have this separate drive for the stage 3 and for the REM. A lot of people have tried to game it, so it's like I can make it so I drop right into stage 3 and then I wake up as soon as it's done and then I'll drop into REM, as if stage 2 isn't important. It is.
You said
It's
we
like
spent
saying,
more than
well,
50% of the time in N2,
yeah,
right?
yeah, it's not a waste of time. Like, it's actually most of the work of sleep is happening there. That's like saying, the most important macronutrient is protein, and like the second most important is like whole grain carbs. So I'm going to eat nothing but like raw spelt and red meat, and like with no vegetables and no nothing, because we need carbs to live for energy, and we need protein. Like, you need vegetables too. Like, it's sorry, I go to a lot of diet analogies because it's similarly just foundation. And so the people trying to game, like, I'm all for sleep hacking in all kinds of ways, um, but some people it's more hacking and slashing than like hacking for performance, where they think they're optimizing and they're actually squeezing out all the nutrition, and they're left with like these, the whole is bigger than the sum of the parts, and you're left with a couple of parts.
What are what could people do? So, like, this is something I've heard of as well, is that over the course of the life cycle, you have a decreased efficiency of sleep,
Oh yeah.
especially perimenopausal women. So, why does that happen? And what can those folks do to mitigate those issues? Because my parents are right in that pool and they're like, Michael, I can't sleep in a month. Ah, it's physiology. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, on the one hand, well, first of all, there's this interesting paradox that it seems largely inevitable that as people get older, your sleep gets more shallow and broken up. You spend more time awake during the night, you have more awakenings, you spend more time in stage one, less time in stage three. To the point where if there's a 65-year-old male who shows up in clinic and he has zero stage three, and he's like, should I be worried about that? I would say, actually, that's not out of the range of normal anymore. You know? And so this is normal. Can't fix normal. And actually, the paradox is, though, if you, and this is something that's been replicated a bunch of times now in a bunch of ways, that if you ask people, do you have a problem with your sleep? Is your sleep interfering with your ability to function? Um, and you track that over age, the age group, even without any covariates in the model, just raw numbers, the age group in both men and women who report the highest levels of my sleep is a problem for me, I'm not getting enough. The difference between what I want and what I need is high. Like, it's not refreshing. Like, I'm experiencing fatigue. Um, it doesn't almost doesn't even matter how you ask the question. If you're looking for satisfaction data, the age group that reports the worst sleep satisfaction are 20-year-olds, like 20 to 30-year-olds. They are actually the group who are the most dissatisfied. Now, women between 25 and 35 report more sleep disturbance than women in menopause. Um, it's just, we don't talk about it that way. We think about it as like life circumstances and all kinds of stuff. Men, too. Men 18 to 24 report more sleep disturbances than any other, without even any covariates in the model. These are, you know, you can talk about potentially why, but even with like sleep apnea and middle age, you see it's actually the 18 to 24-year-olds are the ones who are most likely to say, I'm not getting enough. I'm not feeling rested by my sleep, that sort of thing. And actually, there is no age group that is statistically less likely to report problems with their sleep than 80 plus year olds. Um, it only goes down. It goes up a little bit around, between 40 and 55 and 60, for both men and women. Women much more so than men, but then this and then continues to go down. So this is the paradox. Sleep is getting more shallow and more broken up objectively. And subjectively, people are experiencing that. And even the fatigue, even daytime fatigue, we showed that it declines with age until about age 70, then it starts rising again. And that rise was completely eliminated once we threw diagnosable medical health conditions in the model. That rise in fatigue after 70, that's not aging. Um, that's illness issues and mental health and other stuff. So why is this getting better with age instead of worse? Why are people feeling less fatigued and less sleep deprived as they get older? Um, and but then, how does that gel with the experience of people saying, I have a problem? Um, Sleep apnea increases with age. Insomnia increases with age. Chronic pain increases with age. There's lots of potentially addressable issues that increase with age. Address those issues. Hating your sleep as you get older is not normal aging. That's what the data showed. Yes, your sleep is going to become more shallow, but it shouldn't interfere with your life. It shouldn't be a problem for you. Um, with age comes things like resilience, things like perspective. Also comes with things like you have different expectations of your own functioning. There was this great study that was done in the early 2000s where they took a bunch of 20 somethings and 60 somethings in the lab for a sleep deprivation experiment, but they looked at them separately. And they asked them how well rested they were, and they both rated about equally in the lab. Then they sleep deprived them both, and they asked them, how impaired do you think you are? And they both rated themselves as about 25% impaired after a night of not sleeping. Then they actually measured their level of impairment. The older people were actually only about 20% impaired, so they overestimated how impaired they were even. The younger people were like 70% impaired. They massively underestimated how impaired they were. So what this shows me is older people, their baseline levels, yeah, I mean, from an impairment perspective, when they were walking in the door, they both felt kind of well rested, but the younger people were, they had faster reaction times and processing speed was faster and all this stuff because they were in their 20s, not in their 60s. But they were more sensitive, where like they started at a disadvantage, but take a sleep deprived 20-year-old, versus a sleep deprived 60-year-old. 60-year-old's hanging in there where the 20-year-old is falling apart. So they might be more sensitive. You see the same thing with obesity, where the link between how much you sleep and your BMI completely changes with age, where the younger you are, the more sleep you get, the better. Once you hit about middle age, the benefit of longer than 8 hours seems to go away. And once you hit 65, it doesn't matter anymore. There's no correlation. The correlation disappears. Same thing happens with hypertension. Same thing happens with, smoking. Smoking, nicotine's a stimulant. Younger people who smoke have way worse sleep problems. But the correlation between smoking and sleep problems weakens as you get older. So, like, maybe as you get older, maybe your sleep becomes objectively worse, but you become a little more resilient to the effects of it. Um, and unless it's a solvable problem, in which case you go to the doctor for that. If you have sleep apnea, get it treated. If you have insomnia, get it treated. If you have depression, get it treated. If you have chronic pain, get it managed. And people can sleep with chronic pain. It's usually the worry about these things that's keeping people up.
Are you?
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
I was gonna say, are you a completely different person after the age of like 65, 70? Is that kind of like, is that like a decent summary?
Well, I think that the 65-70 thing exists for two reasons. One is we have this cultural idea that like when you're born, you go through rapid changes in your first year of life. And then you're a toddler and you go through lots of changes until you go to school. And then as you're a school age kid, your body goes and your brain goes through lots of changes until you become an adolescent. And when you're an adolescent, your body goes and your mind goes through all these changes until you're 25. And then nothing happens until you're 65. Then all of a sudden you're retired and you have old people issues and problems. And like, but this is how we talk about it as a society. And it doesn't work that way. Things are always changing. There might be faster and slower periods, but you don't go from 25 to 65 and just like with nothing. There's all kinds of stuff that happens. It's more gradual, but we superimpose that, a culture where there's something very important that happens around 65 and 70 that dramatically changes people's experience of their sleep. Retirement. And, when you don't have to get up to go to work anymore, that changes your sleep schedule. So it's like if you look at people's chronotype, where their natural biological night is, and how late and how much of a night owl or early person they are, it seems to constantly be changing across the lifespan. The little kids wake up early and then it drifts later, and then it peaks in the early 20s and it starts drifting earlier. But if you have the same work schedule from, 8 to 6 or whatever it is, and maybe when you're younger, it's harder to get there on time at 8. And then when you're older, it's harder to stay there past 6 and still be functional, but still the same. So on paper, your schedule looks similar across all of these years. But actually, it's been under the hood, it's been changing the whole time. It's just we didn't give it the opportunity to present itself, and we've been adjusting to it. So I think on one hand, yes, we become a very different person, not because our body suddenly changes at 65, but because our society completely changes our situation around 65 by allowing us to retire and totally adapt our schedule to now. This is why um, the proportion of the population getting 7 to 8 hours of sleep is almost identical in every age group 18 and above. Um, the amount of people getting short sleep under 7 hours and people getting long sleep more than 8 hours. That's what's changing from group to group, where younger people have more of the longer sleepers, but then they start working and they have more of the short sleepers. And then they retire as there's still some short sleepers, but now there's more longer sleepers in older adults too. Like, because now they have time. I mean, so it's part of it is, yes, we become a different person because the world around us changes fundamentally, not because we change fundamentally at 65. I think there might be fits and starts of change, but it's been way more gradual than that all along. We've just sort of sucked it up.
This is well, my last question for you is what if I gave you an unlimited number of grad students, postdocs, and funding and time, what are some of the big questions that you're still curious about?
So I'm still very curious about why we don't live as long, though we if people aren't sleeping healthy, though we've come a long way with that. So the first question I would go after is, what are the unconventional and unknown paths that are linking sleep to outcomes that we haven't thought of yet that are potentially targetable? Number one. Number two is, how do you actually improve sleep health in a real world setting with all kinds of situational environmental constraints between using behavior, technology, supplements, whatever? What works? What doesn't work? And more importantly, how do you decide what's going to work for an individual person? Um, and a lot of that goes to the next question that I have, which I think is the most important question in the field right now, is how do you measure and conceptualize sleep need? How much sleep do I need? I have no idea how much sleep you need. Part of the answer, part of the reason why it's complicated is need for what? When someone says, how much sleep do I need? Are they asking, what is the average amount of sleep I need to get on a regular basis to perform optimally? Or are they asking, how much is the regular amount of sleep I need to get on a regular basis to not die or totally fall apart? And usually they mean both, and they only want one number. They say, I need at least 7 hours to perform optimally, and if I'm less than that, then I fall apart. It's like, well, that's not true. Maybe you need 7.5 hours to perform optimally, but you can do just fine on 6 and just not die. Maybe you have slightly elevated risk of bad outcomes, but so does worrying about not sleeping. So like, there's lots of things are risk factors. And so what do you need? What are you searching for? What do you want? And then maybe the optimal amount of sleep for your immune system is very different from your optimal sleep for your cognition, which might be different than your optimal sleep for emotion processing. Like, who knows? We don't have good ways of measuring this. And I think that's one thing we really need to better first conceptualize. Like, how do we even wrap our head around this concept of need to answer the question? And then how do we develop methods to actually answer that question so we can say what people need? Um, the other thing that I'm really going after is that I really care about is, how can we better calibrate our sleep to our real world demands? What is it that people actually care about? And how do you calibrate your ability to sleep around those demands? So, like, maybe I don't need to sleep perfectly, but I want to be able to be X amount functionality at work while also having Y amount of functionality in my social relationships. Like, I want to be productive at work without pissing everyone off and alienating myself. Like, how do I do that? And how do I use sleep as an ally in this way? And so that's what I'm really interested in, is trying to take what we can learn about the physiology and translate it into ways that people can actually get a little closer to the life that they want to live, to whatever degree that's under their control. And like, I don't know that we're going to solve climate change by helping everyone sleep better, but it couldn't hurt. Um, and and I only say that half jokingly, in that, like, it would, imagine everyone was sleeping a little bit better, thinking a little bit clearer, having a little better social interactions, being a little more empathic, because that's what happens when you don't sleep. You become isolated, and you don't judge social situations well, and you become more self-focused. And like, what if everyone in the world got a little better sleep, and it would make things just a little bit better of a place. We'd work together a little bit better and work to solve some of these problems, and we wouldn't all be in such a bad mood all the time.
Yeah, the downstream effects are nearly
Exactly.
endless.
Yeah, and that's the good thing is you can actually make an impact. You can actually make a difference. That's the thing with sleep is everybody sleeps. We don't sleep because we like it. We sleep because we don't have any other choice. And and if we're gonna do it anyway, you know, like we try and breathe clean air, we try and drink clean water, we try and eat healthy food. Let's try and why don't we pay attention to this too as a way to invest in ourselves and in our communities?
That's perfect. This has been wonderful. I took like an entire page of notes, and I wasn't planning on doing that, but I personally learned a lot from this, and I know the audience will as well. So I want to thank you,
Awesome.
Dr. Grandner, for coming on today. This was brilliant.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to do it. I'm happy to help, and you know where to find me if you need me.
Perfect. I'll link your email in the show notes and everything, and yeah, I'll
Excellent.
check you later.
All right. Thank you so much.